She called the cops on me for fishing in my own lake, then federal agents cuffed her in court. I sat on my dock with my grandfather's brass compass in my hand and watched the woman who'd terrorized our neighborhood for years lose everything she'd built on stolen water. That small, stupid afternoon fishing trip turned into the last straw that exposed a 5-year criminal empire. I'm Jake Reynolds. I grew up on this lake. My family has owned it since 1952. I've got the deed, the survey maps, and a compass that used to guide my grandfather when he mapped the watershed by hand. The lake is 12 acres of water and memory. It's where I learned to fish at 7, and the only place I wanted to be after I retired from a career as a hydraulic engineer. So, when a woman in a navy blazer marched down the hill from the HOA common area waving a sheet of paper and shouting that I was creating a public safety hazard, I thought it was a neighborhood spat at worst. Kimberly Foster. Pine Valley, HOA president. Power suit, clipped shoes. The kind of voice that expects to be obeyed, stood on the shore and read a printed emergency community safety regulation like a stage direction. "You need to stop what you're doing immediately," she announced, then dialed 911 as if that made her authority real. I paddled to the dock, tied off my kayak, walked up and offered her my deed. I said almost politely, "This is private property. My family has owned this lake since my grandfather filed the original survey." Deputy Jenkins looked at my deed, looked at Kimberly's hastily printed regulation and told her what I already knew. There was no lawful basis to stop me from fishing on my own water. Her face changed color. She muttered something about future emergency services, then that small calculated panic, the sort that happens when someone's carefully stacked plan starts to wobble, flashed across her features. After the deputy left, she and 2 men with clipboards huddled at their cars, whispering and pointing at the lake. I noticed the way an engineer notices everything that the HOA property line was lined with intake pipes disappearing under the water, with commercial-grade pumps tucked behind decorative shrubs. There were flow meters, intake collars, and a utility meter labeled Pine Valley Water Management, not Pine Valley HOA. My stomach dropped. I took photos, measured the gauge, and realized the lake was 6 to 12 inches low compared to the old brass marker my grandfather installed. That translated to tens of thousands of gallons missing. Then, the mail arrived the next day, a $5,000 fine, a cease and desist, and a notice demanding a safety inspection within 72 hours, all stamped yesterday before Kimberly ever confronted me at the water. Someone had planned that confrontation. I spent the first week running tests and following paper trails like it was my job again. My engineering instincts did the rest. The pump serial numbers matched equipment I'd seen at other properties. The HOA's electricity use spiked overnight when the pumps ran. Invoices showed Pine Valley paying over $200,000 a year to a company called Reynolds Lake Water Management, LLC, a name using my family's legacy without permission. A text came from an unknown number, Brad, from Clearwater Environmental Services inspection tomorrow at 9 a.m. Clearwater was 6 months old on the records. Kimberly was listed as the primary contact. It smelled like a shell. I called Melissa Mitchell, an environmental lawyer I'd worked with years ago. Don't sign anything. Don't pay anything. Document everything she said, and drove up that afternoon. By dinner, we had a plan and a pile of terrible possibilities. Organized theft shell companies bribed county inspectors. Linda Murphy, a woman who used to be Kimberly's secretary and who was now quietly trembling while she slid a box of papers across my kitchen table, told us the worst part. Invoices, cash receipts, and signed agreements showing cash payments to county inspectors to look the other way. My chest felt heavy like the compass in my pocket. For a minute, maybe a long minute, I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd missed something. Drought drainage changes. It's a small, dangerous thing when you start to doubt a lifetime of facts. I went to bed and woke up thinking I'd been a fool to get involved. I almost gave up more because the thought of fighting a well-connected HOA president who had money lawyers and local influence seemed exhausting than because I was actually scared. But then I opened my grandfather's files. His surveys were meticulous dates. bearings, hydrological charts. His handwriting in tidy columns, and the original 1952 contract said explicitly, "Our family owned subsurface and water rights in perpetuity." The papers felt heavier than the doubts. They pointed north like a compass that never lied. That was the moment I stopped feeling like a man in over his head and started feeling like a man who had been handed a map to a wrong that needed fixing. We gathered people who mattered: Melissa, a hydrologist from the State University named Dr. Lisa Thompson, Mike Harrison from the County Tribune, and my sister Jenny, who's a corporate lawyer. Linda provided recordings of Kimberly talking about expanding extraction before anyone figures it out. Mike had been following strange HOA budgets for years. The bills didn't add up landscaping costs that didn't match the work payments to shell companies' electricity spikes at night, Doc Dort. Thompson's tests told us the environmental story extraction volumes and contamination vectors that traced back to pumped withdrawals and to industrial clients who were treating and dumping wastewater into tributaries that fed the same aquifer. Jenny unraveled company registries, Delaware filings, nominee directors, bank transfers, steering profits offshore. We were building a picture that read like organized crime siphoned water from private lakes shell companies laundering money county officials on the take and industrial buyers who returned contaminated water to the watershed. I spent nights leaving a tripod by the lake taking timed photos of pumps matching serial numbers to invoices and logging power usage spikes with timestamps. We built a chain of custody so clean you could eat off it. The turning point came when evidence met timing: Linda's receipts, Dr. R. Thompson's samples, the bank records Jenny pulled, and Mike's interviews with other victims. Betty, whose well went dry. Robert, whose fish pond dropped 6 inches and then died off. Tom, whose creek dwindled to a trickle after a pump showed up hidden in the bushes. We filed an emergency injunction and sat in a federal courtroom that felt colder than any HOA meeting room ever had. Judge Janet Hendricks read the charges we laid out like black tinder on white paper: organized theft, money laundering, bribery, environmental crimes that threatened thousands of families downstream. Kimberly's lawyers tried to spin it as civil disputes and legitimate business practice. Then Melissa put Dr. Thompson on the stand with maps that showed contamination vectors and survey overlays from my grandfather's notebooks. Jenny walked the judge through offshore transfers. Mike played recorded conversations where Kimberly spoke about bribing inspectors and scaling operations. Linda testified about cash envelopes and instructions to keep things quiet. The courtroom was the first place all the bits fit. When the judge granted a temporary restraining order, froze assets, and ordered the pumps shut down. Kimberly's face drained of color. Federal agents executed search warrants, seized equipment, and later that day cuffed her. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut is a sound I'll never forget. It was the ending of a long, ugly sentence that had been building for years. At the community center the next week, the room that used to hang on Kimberly's every word erupted into a chorus of anger. Neighbors stood up and read their bills aloud, held up photos of their depleted wells, and demanded answers. The same woman who had once shut people down with a clear throat and a PowerPoint now fumbled through denials as Mike laid out the financial trail to shell companies and offshore accounts. She was removed from office on the spot. Federal prosecutors filed RICO charges and money laundering indictments. I didn't stay for a victory lap. I went back to the dock and cast my line into water that finally started to climb back to where it belonged. The pumps were silent. The monitoring system Dr. Thompson helped install hummed, and the brass compass lay on the planks beside me, needle steady north. Kimberly's assets were frozen, indictments were filed, and a dozen officials faced charges for taking cash to ignore permit violations. That was where my story stopped. Not with a party, not with a parade, but with the woman who called the cops on a man fishing on his own lake sitting in a courtroom while federal agents read charges. The pumps were off. The water began to heal. The papers were filed. The evidence sat heavy on the judge's bench. The last thing I want you to carry from this is simple documents and patience beat arrogance and theft.